Let's go!
Yeah, there was something I really wanted to check out based on a very interesting Twitter thread that popped up over the past, like, couple days of somebody that really dug into the files of a little game called Fighting Vipers. I don't know if many people actually know about this game. It's an old Sega Saturn game that launched on Xbox 360 back in the duh. This was essentially like a spiritual successor to Virtua Fighter, and also, you know, later fighting games that Sega would go on and make that are like their big fabled 3D fighting game franchises. Just to show people what Fighting Vipers is, right? Just for like a small perspective on the situation. You could get this on Xbox, but the thing that was discovered for it was kind of super specific to the arcade version. Although this version is wonderful, right? These ports were absolutely amazing. I can play on Xbox Live, for God's sake. Holy hell, man. And again, an interesting roster that is very much 90s. You get Vasquez from Aliens. You get this guy. Bond.
Round one. Let the action begin. Go.
Let the action begin. Himonograd. Can I get a Himonograd over here? So the funny thing about this game is that there were some secrets that recently just popped up, right? This guy is just a not version of Kazuya. Come here, I'm gonna kick the shit out of you. Ugh. And it's funny, right? It's got some crazy ass gimmicks. Ugh. I'm gonna kick the shit out of you. And on Saturn, this was a fantastic port, like a really, really fun and interesting game. But you would barely ever find an arcade version of Fighting Vipers. I think I saw Fighting Vipers 2 in arcades. You want to try out my Himonograph? Hold on a second, chat. Stop jumping, you dank bitch. Ow! Wow, I'm out of the ring. Yeah, you like that? Ugh, I got 40 G's of something. See, it's got some crazy gimmicky stuff, right? This was in the mid-90s and shit like that. Yes, and somebody just mentioned it. Is this not the game with Pepsi Man? Yes. Pepsi Man was a secret character, I believe, in the Sega Saturn version. What's nuts is over the past few days, somebody got deep and thick into the code of Fighting Vipers on the arcade version of the game. And as someone that is just absolutely in love with old Sega arcade classics, this was a fantastic read. So from Salty Freeman, if you're a fan of fighting game secrets, reverse old engineering, or understanding of how things worked in arcade games in the 90s, I got a story for you. In the early 2000s on GameWinners.com, there was a cheat listed for the arcade version of Fighting Vipers to play as B. Mahler. Y'all might know this character as BM. Me and Simmons had a little video. Hang on a second. Let's take another blast to the past. For this little show me and Simmons had called Sega Saturn Saturday. Wow, look at these weirdos. Wow.
What makes it so much better? Matt,
10 years.
punch people through walls. Okay, punching people through walls. Through walls!
Fair enough. And there was a boss character that's name was literally BM.
BTW versus BM.
Versus BM.
BM.
The last guy's fucking name is Bowel Movement. So, funny enough, right, BM, the last boss of the game, stands for Big Mauler. So anyway, let's move forward. It seemed to have a ridiculous requirement of the arcade cabinet to play as Big Mauler. You needed accumulated 15,000 plays. 15,000 plays to play as Big Mauler, and you have to do this code and shit to get it. Like, fucking what? That's a lot for an arcade machine. So how would one even find an arcade cabinet with 15,000 plays, and then you know the button combination for the secret character, given the skirtless candy cheat is listed, which is like, you know, just a side costume for a character, as well as 100 versus wins in a row to unlock the cheat. They were probably translated from an unknown source. 15,000 versus matches, which is almost impossible unless it's the most popular arcade machine in the world. And there had to be like 100 versus wins in a row logged in at some point to actually get this to work. So it's just not gonna happen. Like whatever's in here is locked behind the most ridiculous requirements, right? So if someone tried this cheat as it was listed, would it work? It wouldn't. Why? The game's code reveals some weird hints about the character select. funky code and shit, right? First, the game checks if the time at the character select screen is greater than 18 seconds, you only have the first 2 of 20 seconds to execute a button combination. So you only have 2 seconds to enter some funky ass code. The document sheet incorrectly states, wait until the 9-second mark. And if you have more than 18 seconds left, the game then checks your held inputs. If both player 1 start and player 1 up is held, the game's code execution bypasses the cheat. So some very weird shit that was built into the game. Why did they make it like this? That's a great question. Why the hell would they do this? Why would they put the weirdest shit into the arcade version of Fighting Vipers? Here's where it gets interesting. So if you hold down these button combinations within the time frame, the game checks the backup RAM to see how many versus matches have been played. The keyword here is versus, meaning 2 human players, not just player versus. So you needed 15,000 versus matches. If you held all these buttons and did this stuff in the time span of 2 seconds, the game adds a 1 to the length of the character select array. So what does that have to do with Big Baller? What does it have to do with the good old BM here? This is the visible character select in Fighting Vipers, right? You can see like the list of characters, and they're given their own individual codes from like 1 with a gap in between, all mixed up. They're in order of the typical base roster, but the full roster and code is actually, you know, kind of all screwy. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's all messed up. We see 2 extra values added onto the code, value 8 and 0A. If our cheat code adds a 1 to how long the character select is, we get the value 8, which is actually regular Mauler, which is weird. I think regular Mauler in the Xbox 360 version, this version that's here in the background, is actually selectable. So they changed the code of the Xbox 360 version of Fighting Vipers to have regular Mauler selectable for some reason. They were just like, hey, here's an extra character, you can play as him. Okay, interesting. But it isn't the last guy. It's not Big Mauler. If everything's done correctly, you get this unique character, but wait, why is he purple? It's the same reason you sometimes start with green characters and orange characters. When you first enter the character select, you hold the start button, it gives you an alternate color. Okay, interesting. So because of how the game works, you can only select the alternate palette of this guy. But how does it look for 2 players? Well, it goes back to the normal color palette. This is what the character normally looks like, and we can sort of match that up with this over here. Okay, that makes sense, right? It's just an alt color that it defaults to. But wait a minute. If each player has a code and both codes are added to that one character select, won't the array increase beyond the base character, just beyond the hidden Mauler, to maybe the next value? So what's the value after that if you do the code and the timing and all this shit? It's actually not the case. When the conditions are met and the check starts, it grabs the original value, and the character select, the length of it, is not the usual one in memory. So who's the next character, you ask? Alternate colors. Oh, that's interesting. So now you get alternate color characters. You get this weird green version of Grace. You get, like, you know, the alternate color of Picky, who's the kid with the skateboard. Okay, that's sick. Now you do it beyond these characters. Who do you get? Sonic and Tails. What? You actually get Sonic and apparently Sonic hidden deep below the values of characters, stuck away in the code somewhere. The original inspiration that led to the creation of Sonic Fighters as its own standalone game is in the engine of Fighting Vipers, because it also was sharing the same engine at the time. And yes, and somebody pointed out that there was some weird hidden characters in the game where you can play as like Sega employees and shit. And yeah, Sonic and these other characters are proper characters that were selectable through the most insane means. You didn't have to hack the game to get them. They were actually there. The requirements to get these characters to be actually functioning and playable was built into the game, but no one figured out how to do it until recently. And then, yeah, you get some really weird stuff between like Sega employees and what the hell am I looking at? Some weird ass crazy shit. The greatest mystery of all, the essential origin of what Sonic the Fighters is, and we've played Sonic Fighters a few times. It's been a while. This is also an Xbox 360 game you can play, built into the Fighting Vipers engine. So ultimately, it's been solved. The solution of how you eventually get these characters playable has finally been figured out after... When did Fighting Vipers come out? Like, how long has the arcade version of this game existed? Fighting Vipers came out in 1995. That's not 28 years, is it? 95, 05, 15, Ah, sweet Jesus. 28 years later, nearly 30 years, did someone actually figure out how Sonic and Tails were hidden in the code of fighting Vipers, and they were actually selectable by the most insane means. Such a cool story, right? I love this shit. There was another video that happened not that long ago about Street Fighter Alpha 2, how Shin Akuma was kind of like mystery selectable in the like SNES version of the game, and somebody found a way to do it. So fucking neat, right? I don't know. I love this shit, right? I love that there is essential cheats and hidden things in fighting games still to this day that have not been figured out. And even Ed Boon has said the same thing about his own characters, right? Or his own games, that, yeah, there are stuff people haven't found yet. There are things that are in the old Mortal Kombat codes and cheats that people still have not actually discovered, and maybe will be discovered fairly soon because people are like getting into the source code and stuff like that. This was incredibly cool. And as someone that grew up with these games, right, knowing that this was secretly in the arcade version of Fighting Vipers is neat. It's not in the Saturn version though. The Saturn version got another character. The Sega Saturn version got this guy. And to be honest, I'll take Pepsi Man any day. The real hero, Pepsi Man.